question one. The EU summit that took place in Brussels was called the last chance for Theresa May to get an agreement on Brexit. Nevertheless, she left summit and the urgent meeting of the EU was cancelled. How do you think, what is the reason of this failure? Why all the attempts to reach an agreement on Brexit fail?
Okay, was the European Council a failure? I'm not too sure, partly because we're still talking. It's not as though the UK and the EU have stopped talking, have stopped negotiating, they're still there. I think it was a failure insofar as they didn't actually reach the final agreement they were looking for, but they've nevertheless made it clear to Theresa May what needs to be done in terms of making some concessions, particularly around the Irish backstop, and the hope obviously is that they will come back at some point in not too distant future, possibly in November, in order to finalise that deal. So the negotiations are still on. We can't actually call them a failure as yet.
They say that the true reason of this failure is the fact that the person who came on summit, Theresa May, doesn't have enough power. How do you think, what is the reason of the political impotence of the British Prime Minister?
Okay, Theresa May is definitely very weak. She doesn't really command universal support within the UK Parliament. She's got a lot of opposition amongst her backbenchers, or among her backbenchers for what she's wanting to do. She's also got opposition from the Democratic Unionist Party from Northern Ireland. This does make her very weak. However, I think she knows full well that she's got to secure a deal at the EU level. She cannot afford to have the UK withdraw from the EU in an unmanaged, chaotic manner. The challenge for her at the moment is to get that deal and then try and take it back to Westminster and get it through Parliament. Whether she'll be able to do all that or not remains to be seen.
Okay. The Brexit negotiations are in the blind alley. The experts coincide in the opinion that the UK will leave EU without a deal. Business circles are alarmed. If they don't find a solution, how painful will the UK-EU divorce? What consequences await Britain and the EU in case of a no-deal Brexit?
I think the chances of a no-deal Brexit have increased. Certainly we cannot rule it out. That said, I think the vast majority of people involved in the negotiations want to secure a deal. Okay. That said, if there is no deal, what would that actually mean? Point is, we just don't know. I think what we are really concerned about, and this is reflected in business sentiment, is the uncertainty that it could induce, indeed the uncertainty that it will induce. We don't know what's going to happen to contracts, we don't know what's going to happen to trade, we don't know what's going to happen to the movement of goods, and the UK will be falling out a whole series of policy and regulatory regimes of the European Union. I think all effort will be made to try and secure a deal, and if there is no deal, try and find some way of mitigating the consequences of that no deal. I know it seems a tight timeline, but there's still 5 months to go, and I think the political will there is to secure a deal.
Since the beginning of Brexit, talks have passed more than 2 years. Still, there is no understanding how it will be. There were a lot of hopes put on this summit. Is the UK disappointed by such failure? What reaction should Theresa May expect from her party fellows and from her opponents?
Okay. I think when Theresa May went along to this summit, she wasn't necessarily anticipating there would be a deal. There was progress in negotiations over the last week or so, but it was clear on Monday that Theresa May did not have the political support domestically to really clinch a deal at the Brussels European Council. She does need to secure a deal in due course. She has to take that back to Parliament. The big question is whether the support will be there to see that through. She's got opposition from ardent Brexiteers who are unwilling to sign up to anything that could involve the UK staying in a customs union. She's got an enormous amount of opposition from the Democratic Unionist Party who refuse to accept anything which might cause some divisions between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And on top of that, she's got enormous opposition from the opposition, the Labour Party, who are refusing to sign up to any deal that doesn't include the United Kingdom in a customs union. Really problematic, really difficult for her. But I'd say that, once again, the will is there to try and secure a deal. The question is, will she be able to do that and then get it through Parliament? We've got to wait and see.
Okay, question 5. May initially suggested a harsh variant of Brexit. According to the last plan, UK should leave EU but stay in the customs union. Both variants didn't comply EU. What is the reason? What kind of Brexit wants EU? Or the matter is in the different interests of concrete members of the EU?
Okay. I think from an EU's perspective, they want something which is as disruptive as possible. They'd like to see as much continuity as is possible, and that would see the United Kingdom stay in the customs union, stay in the single market. The big problem there for the UK is that involves taking on certain obligations which don't fit with the aspirations of the Brexiteers. If you want to be in the single market, you've got to accept the free movement of people. Anti-immigration sentiment was a key driver in the referendum. If you stay in the customs union, you've got to sign up to EU trade deals, and that really restricts your capacity to negotiate your own trade deals with third countries. And that is something which the UK is not willing to accept. From the EU's perspective, if you're not willing to sign up to the obligations, you don't get the benefits. Therefore, in all likelihood, I think we're going to see the EU working from the assumption that the UK will get a free trade agreement plus some other elements in due course. But on the other hand, the EU is unwilling to really enter into negotiations on the future until the UK has left. It's been really quite clear about that from the outset, that there's no future negotiations until the terms of the withdrawal agreement have been settled, and those terms have still not been sorted out.
Question 6. There's a number of serious questions that are unsolved. The Ireland and Northern Ireland border is one of them. Why it is one of the sticking points? Why is it one of the sticking points? What consequences will bring the border or its absence? Why neither of variants comply the sides of the conflict? Is there a way out of this blind alley?
Okay. The Irish border question is of vital importance to the EU. It's also of vital importance to the UK. Basically, neither the European Union nor the UK wants to see the return of a hard border on the island of Ireland. For those of us who live on the island, you simply don't notice the border. It isn't there. And in terms of the historical peace process, EU integration, plus the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement, has taken the border out of politics. What Brexit is doing is putting the border very much back into politics. And that is causing divisions, that's causing concerns, that's causing uncertainty about what it might mean for the future of the peace process. And this is reflected in a lot of the statements of the EU and the British government, that they want to avoid a return to the past, they want to avoid a hard border. The problem is, if you want to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, you have to have the free movement of goods. So you have to effectively have Northern Ireland, or the UK as a whole, in the customs union, in the single market for goods. Now, in theory, this can be done, either through the UK signing up to the customs union and the single market, or, as the EU has proposed, keeping Northern Ireland in the single market and the customs union, and then trying to reduce the number of checks and controls that would entail for goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In this, we have to remember that the United Kingdom government has already signed up to, or committed to, no barriers to movement of goods between Northern Ireland and Britain. What we also need to remember is there are already some checks on the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Animal products and live animals are all checked coming onto the island. So the principle of checks and controls in the Irish Sea is not unprecedented. They can be introduced, and there is a precedent for it. Whether they will be introduced or whether the UK is willing to accept that model depends very much on domestic politics. I think it's clear to say that it's very, very obvious that a good number of politicians in Northern Ireland are vehemently opposed to this, as are a significant number of people. But equally, if we look at business voices, they generally want to maintain as much of the status quo as possible and seem quite happy to accept what is being proposed by the European Union.
Question 7. Recently, Boris Johnson said that Brexit negotiations put UK before a choice: break up, break down, or enslavement. That UK is trying to make out of a permanent UK colony. Is it so? Do you agree? If yes, why EU tries to bring UK to its knees?
Boris Johnson is infamous for his flamboyant language. He said many things in the past, and in many respects the language he's using about enslavement, colony, is very much in line with the sort of hyperbole that he's known to use. I think it's fair to say that if Northern Ireland were to remain in the customs union and single market, or the UK were to remain in the customs union and single market, that will come with obligations. You simply cannot have the benefits of EU membership without taking on some of the obligations. The EU has been firm about this from the very start. Indeed, historically, the EU, with the UK as a member, has always been firm on this. It's one of the consequences of leaving. If you leave, you cannot have the same rights and obligations, rights as members. You have to take on similar levels of obligations if you want them. As for whether this idea will break up the United Kingdom, I think once again that's overstating matters. Pragmatic arrangements can be implemented, but we have to accept that there are concerns about what the proposed arrangements might mean for Northern Ireland, for the United Kingdom. And what we have to remember here is it's not just Northern Ireland. Scotland is looking for very similar arrangements to what was being offered to Northern Ireland in terms of access to the single market, participation in the customs union. And Theresa May, quite rightly, is concerned about the future of the United Kingdom, because if the Scottish nationalists do gain further support, then it puts back on the political agenda the possibility of a Scottish referendum and possibly the independence of Scotland.
Okay. My last question. The Conservative Party is not compiled with Theresa May politics. Some demand another Brexit negotiator. Some assure that a vote of no confidence is being prepared. Because of the Brexit failure, there are a lot of discussions about May resignation. What do you think about May political destiny? Could she save her position and save herself from a political catastrophe?
At the moment, I doubt very much that Theresa May is really thinking much beyond 29th of March next year. Her priority as Prime Minister from the outset has been to secure the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. That seems to be her key, it is her key task. I think, yes, there are a considerable number of politicians, members of her own party, who are dissatisfied with the way she's actually proceeding, but they haven't necessarily come up with an alternative. It's not as though there's a lot of people lining up to take over from her at this stage. Arguably, she has a poison chalice. It's impossible for her to find an outcome which will get support from all her backbenchers. I think her priority at the moment is survival to secure the deal. I think it's fair to say that once she's secured the deal, once the UK leaves, she may well consider her own position. Equally, I think her party may well want to consider whether they want her to continue as leader and as Prime Minister. Arguably, she will have delivered what she set out to do. The way will then be clear for someone else to come in and begin the negotiations on the future UK-EU relationship. At the moment, it's difficult to see Theresa May surviving that long, but I think it's fair to say she will survive until the UK leaves the EU.